Shaw Cohen, a New York City-based composer and director of the Landscape Music Composers Network, and I'm joined here by three of the composers who are featured on tonight's concert with Cadillac Moon Ensemble at the Parrish Art Museum. I would love to have each of you introduce yourselves and tell us what pieces or piece are being featured on the program tonight.
Thanks. My name is Justin Rawls. I'm based out of Portland, Oregon. The pieces that are going to be on tonight's performance are Night Psalm for solo flute and pre-recorded soundscape, and the world premiere of Wolves and Rivers, which features Cadillac Moon Ensemble and pre-recorded soundscape.
I'm Stephen Wood, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and tonight my piece, Celestial Seasons for solo cello, will be performed.
My name is Stephen Elias. I'm a composer based in Texas, and I'm having a piece for marimba performed tonight called Hall of the White Giant, which was inspired by a location in Carlsbad Caverns.
So Justin, we both chose to focus on wildlife in our pieces for tonight's concert. And I was hoping you could give a quick summary of the theme of Wolves and Rivers, and then talk a little bit about why you chose that subject matter to commemorate the Park Service centennial.
Yeah, well, one of my work is influenced by the soundscape, so natural sound, and so wildlife sounds feature prominently in my experience in nature. And of Wolves and Rivers is specifically inspired by trophic cascade in Yellowstone National Park, which is a concept of reintroducing wolves as a top predator, and then having that ripple literally in the landscape in the effects of other wildlife, and the rivers changing course has been documented. And so the sound of the wolf is sort of a motif for the piece, and as well as change. And
why did this subject matter appeal to you in connection to the centennial of the Park Service?
Well, a few months, it was about last spring, and we had decided, that you asked me to write this piece, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? And I had just got the cover issue of National Geographic that featured Yellowstone. And I've been very involved with Yosemite, and in terms of writing music about Yosemite, and all of a sudden Yellowstone kind of came in, and it was very refreshing, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And so I thought, well, this is, Yellowstone was the first national park, and I was just very inspired and captivated by the stories in that issue, and had been to Yellowstone as a kid, but then this summer revisited Yellowstone again. So I thought, this is the time I'm going to go all out, and yeah.
Great. Celestial Seasons for cello transcends a particular place and is really about a more universal experience of changing seasons. And I was wondering if you could talk a little about how referring to universal experiences of the natural world informs your music, and how you approached the concept of seasons in your work.
Well, as a composer, I focus primarily on wilderness areas, and wilderness areas are places that allow for universal existence to live and live freely. And so last year, when I was asked by an Atlanta cellist to write these pieces for her seasonal concerts, I approached the music as something that was overarching over the whole year, as opposed to specific places for each season. And so I wrote each movement during each season, and was able to really connect with, what was happening in all places as opposed to a specific place.
As we all know, many composers, past and present, have been inspired by the natural world, but I'm not aware of any composer who's created such a large body of work focusing specifically on national parks. So I was wondering if you could talk, both in relation to your piece tonight and in the context of your body of work, how referring to particular parks and experiences in parks enables you what you want to say musically.
Sure. Well, it's been a fun ride for me. I think all artists draw on whatever inspires them most to make their art, and so it was a very easy step for me to start drawing on the national parks, because whether you're interested in human history or geology or soundscapes or the predator-prey relationships or biology, there's just an infinite number of sources of inspiration even within one park, and then extrapolate that out to the over 400 park locations we have in the United States. It immediately seemed to me, as I thought about it, like an unending source of inspiration. So it's been about an 8 or 9 year journey for me that I've been on, just drawing on that to create inspiration. And sometimes I'll develop a relationship with a specific park, and that will lead to a piece, and that will lead to me approaching performers about performing that piece. And other times, as in the case of this evening's piece, it works in reverse, where a performer will commission me for a piece, and I'll say, as I often do, is it okay if it's about a national park? And if they agree to that parameter, then I start thinking about what would be a good matchup for this commission. For example, another commission was for a flute duo, and I had recently learned that they had discovered flutes in the ruins of Mesa Verde National Park. So it seemed like a perfect matching for that one. And in this case, I thought about the sound of the marimba. It was a commission from a group of marimbaists. And so I thought about that sound, and it struck the notion of if you tap on a stalagmite or stalactite, you get that ringing sound that's sort of similar to a marimba sound. And so I thought, wow, wouldn't it be interesting to write a piece for mallet marimba that was about a cave? And so, as I often do, I figured out how I could have an immersive experience in a cave, and did a quick road trip out to Carlsbad Caverns and took one of their kind of off-trail guided trips where you do sort of spelunking and crawl and get dirty and have a, get out of your comfort zone. And the location was called the Hall of the White Giant, was the place they took us to. So my piece is very experiential. Many of my pieces are about what it felt like for me to be in that situation. So it's got moments of feeling claustrophobic, and moments of feeling like we're climbing or we're crawling or we're walking, moments where you run up against a wall and your momentum is slowed down, and then other moments of sort of sheer beauty of these cascading rock formations coming out of the walls. So that's the trajectory that took me to that particular place.
Great. And your answer made me think of another question. I'm just curious to know the process for each of you, just in terms of actually putting the notes on the page, and to what extent you do or don't do field composing, where you're composing actually in a place. I personally am totally laptop bound. I do everything digitally, so I have to have like a power outlet and a desk to do my work. And I usually, will go out, have an experience in nature, and kind of, process that, synthesize that experience, and have the composing as a really separate process. But I know in composing in the wilderness, you guys have done a lot of more adventurous stuff. So if any or all of you would like to talk about that, I'd be curious.
I'll start. And I should tell your viewers that Composing in the Wilderness is a workshop that the three of us have done together. So that's the way we actually all met. And you're right, that is a good example where we take composers out into the wilderness and they have 4 days of inspiration in Denali where they're unplugged. And so they are forced to use pencil and paper, and then we take them to another location where they do get to plug in. For me personally, I tend to not, most of the time, I tend to not want to distract myself from having the experience by trying too hard to write. I want to have an authentic experience, and so I take thousands of pictures, I do journal entries, sometimes I write poetry, and sometimes I sketch on staff paper melodic or harmonic ideas. And then all of that goes into sort of an idea soup that I take back to my office and do most of my composing in my office, generally electronically, similar to the way you do. But every piece, just about, has some kernel of an idea that I did come up with in the field. There's something that's directly connected to that place, a melody that I wrote or a sound that I heard and then imitated in the piece. So it's a bit of both, but mostly have an experience first, then come back to my studio and do the composing. Others?
Yeah, I feel the immersion is the greatest impact, and the time you have when you go into the backcountry. As me specifically for backcountry, but it doesn't always have to be that far out. But the immersion into the space that you're writing about is where everything begins. Because that time you give yourself in a space allows you to connect on a much deeper level and find the elements of that area and everything that lives there that you overlook if you don't give yourself that time. And so those are the elements that give me the inspiration, either right there and allow the beginnings of musical ideas to form, that it can either be written down or recorded and even hashed out there. But then I usually take that back to the studio and work with that over time.
Yes, and I second both of these guys. I think that the immersive experience is really important, and that's where the pre-composition, if you will, that dreaded word, but it's really true. I also, sometimes I used to take those little kind of Urtext books with the staff paper, but I never found myself writing in that. I would just be drawing pictures instead. What I do take is a little field recorder. Whether I'm recording natural sounds or on the trail, something comes to me and I start singing. I believe that the environment, all environments are creative environments. They have various energies, whether it's New York City or Denali National Park. But there is something signaturally unique about natural environments, non-made human creative environments. And if you spend time in those environments, you take in creative energy. You're taking in ideas. You're present in a creative place, and things are flowing through you. And so I think that it's not necessarily about where you compose or how you compose, but how you spend your time as a composer. And if you immerse yourself in nature, it will come back and pay dividends with you later on, whether you come back to New York City, right? and you're working in a studio environment with your laptop and all this stuff. There's no separation there.
I like the word, everybody's used the word immersive.
Yeah.
And that rings true with me. Because so many of my pieces are based on experience, I also really find it helpful to get out of my comfort zone. If I can go into the wilderness and get a little bit scared, the being scared gives me a really great inspirational thing that can become music. It's much easier for me to write music about an experience that frightened me or surprised me or even something that depressed me. A lot of things that are no fun to have happening to you in the moment make for really good stories later, and those stories can become art in some way. So I like it when I get out of my comfort zone as well.
I feel like there's a lot of commonality in everybody's responses to that, and I feel like it's easy to have a sort of romantic idea of like Beethoven wandering around with the notebook, writing symphonies in the woods. But it seems to me something key is that in order to compose, you have to listen, and you have to be able to absorb experiences from the outside, and then be able to interpret those into your own expression. And so there's a taking in part and a putting out part, sort of.
I was recently at a premiere of Paola Prestini, which she did a wonderful piece called A Video Oratorio, which was about the Colorado River.
Yeah.
And she spoke about exactly this issue. She went on a trip down the Colorado in preparation for it, thinking that she would hear all these sounds in her head, and was surprised to discover that the process of doing it actually was a process of not hearing sounds, but listening to the world around her and being sort of emptied of sound before then she could fill that emptiness with these new musical ideas. So it's something that more and more composers, I think, are exploring, their relationship with the natural world and how that becomes art, and how the sort of murky line between the experience and the art that we're talking about here, how does that happen? It's a little bit magical even to those of us that are doing it.
Yeah, listening is a a very important topic to think about for for what we're doing, because it's how we listen. And as he mentioned, you go out and you think you're going to hear all these sounds, and then but you let that wash away. And for me, most of the things that I hear are in my head. And so if I'm going out into a landscape or backcountry area and I'm still hearing only what's in my head, then I'm not connecting with what's around me. And so, allowing yourself to understand what listening really is, and using your ears and giving yourself time to let that listening experience open up, rather than only listening to what you expect and the chatter in your mind. And so it's been, a really wonderful process for me to work with over the years.
One of the most interesting parts of starting landscapemusic.org and Landscape Music Composers Network is getting connected to composers outside of my area and music being made in different parts of the country. And living in New York City, there's so much vibrant music making, but it can start to feel really New York centric. And so
it looks that way from outside.
Yes,
too.
and it feels that way from inside as well. It's like New York is like a giant bubble a little bit. So it's really motivating and refreshing and interesting for me to keep an awareness outside of New York and stay connected to work like you guys are doing. So I was curious just to have each of you speak a little bit about where you're from, the music making in your area, what it's like being a composer in that place, and what you gain from leaving and traveling and experiencing other places, and what you gain from being in the place where you are based.
Can I chime in first?
Yeah.
I'm from Oregon, Northwest, though I say that I kind of migrate between San Francisco and like Seattle. That's sort of my habitat. And I do see myself as kind of a regional, having a regional aesthetic, or trying to cultivate something that's of a specific place, and working with other people that also see that. And recently, we were just speaking about this earlier, there was the Michael Gordon Commission in Crater Lake National Park, and I was fortunate enough to make it down there and see that performance. And there was a lot of talk before that, time of the commission, of why are we commission, why is the Brit Festival commissioning this New York composer to come out and have this, rough it in Crater Lake and write this piece. There's lots of composers here in Oregon, that have been in Crater Lake, that have spent time there. And I was, I didn't really take a side. I wanted to give Michael the benefit of the doubt, and I thought it was just great that it was happening. But I spoke to many musicians in the Portland area and around Oregon that did have that sentiment that no, you should have an Oregon, someone who's really spent time in that place. But then again, after seeing the piece, which I thought was really organic and well done, I think that it's nice to have someone come from outside and have that dialogue and bring in a fresh perspective. And I think it's really important that we have that dialogue. And I think it's really, so I think that it's our music, and I can speak for myself, and these guys probably too, and you as well. I think our music even has more of an impact when it leaves our locales and comes to a place like Long Island or New York, and people, that's when it's going to really pop and really, wow, that's something that's a little bit different, and even if it's a totally different place. So please.
I think, my musical language is highly influenced from where I live and where I'm from. I live in Atlanta, and so I have a lot of Southern influences. There's a lot of Southern blues, a lot of Southern rock, a lot of salsa. There's a big salsa scene in Atlanta, which I play. Funk, you get some real Southern funk and stuff, and a lot of those rhythmic basses really influence how I musically interpret things and how it comes out for people to play. And then, when I'm from Ohio, so, growing up, there was a lot of really Ohio rock, in my Columbus area. And like last weekend, I was at a family pig roast where there's a lot of people from Kentucky that were bluegrass and old time musicians, and a friend from Ireland who's Irish, and so you had like a lot of Ireland songs, and then a lot of Ohio rock and rollers, and so we just played music all weekend. And I'm doing a residency at the Red River Gorge in Kentucky and composing a string quartet and a youth orchestra for them, and so I got to listen all weekend to a friend playing Kentucky music all weekend, and that's where, right around where I'm from.
But talk about the Wilderness concert series that you've developed in Atlanta. That's such a, I think, a great model for doing things in your region and plugging what you're doing into existing wilderness areas.
Yeah, this concert series I did a couple years ago to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the Wilderness Act, like what's going on this year with the 100th anniversary. And it was a citywide concert series that involved 5 local music venues, or local nature preserves, and 26 artists around the city. And it was modeled actually a little bit after composing the Wilderness, so I took an external entity and experience and then brought it home, and allowed for the artists at home to experience that. And but it was about bringing wilderness to our everyday lives. It was about having that philosophy and that mindset, and how we can appreciate that at home. Yeah, so that's a little bit about that.
My situation is a little bit different in answer to your question. I do make music in Texas. I'm based in Texas. I'm not originally from there. And I've worked closely with a lot of the colleagues at the university where I teach, and there are a lot of great composers in Texas. And I have also written some pieces about Texas national parks. The first national park piece I wrote was about Big Bend National Park. But my creative life over the last 7 or 8 years has been really tied to Alaska more deeply than anywhere else. I've been the artist in residence at Rocky Mountain and at Glacier and some places around the country, but mostly each year I go back to Alaska and partner with the parks up there. And so when you ask where I'm from, sort of nowadays creatively, I'm sort of as much from Alaska as I am from anywhere else. And in that location, I owe a deep debt of gratitude to the groundwork that John Luther Adams put in place up there. Very respected and highly, I think, honored, deservedly so, composer, both in the traditional sense of honors. He's received, awards for his music, but he's also someone that the population up there has a deep respect for. And so he put sort of contemporary classical music based on an Alaskan locale on the map. And he was deeply involved in the wilderness activism that went on up there for many decades. So I feel like what I do up there couldn't have existed if he hadn't been there first. And so I think that's as much home as it is a traveling place for me. But I wanted to go back to this sense of taking the pieces elsewhere. We're celebrating the centennial of the National Park Service, and one of the things that they're most keen on doing during this centennial is reaching new audiences. And one of the things that we're most keen on doing as contemporary composers is reaching new audiences. And this evening we're going to do a concert, and there may be people that come to this concert that wouldn't normally come to a contemporary classical concert, but who like the national parks.
Yep.
And so we'll reach a new audience for that reason. And in doing so, we'll be doing exactly the reverse for the Park Service, where the parks that inspired our pieces, Yellowstone and Carlsbad Caverns, will be reaching an audience on Long Island, an audience that they can't easily reach from their own locale. So I think there's this wonderful symbiosis that's a win-win for the Park Service and a win-win for us as well, that we're able to reach out to people and I think form a network of people that hadn't been together otherwise. And that happens both through working locally and for traveling, which was your original, I think, intent of the question.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Yeah, and not just audiences, but you know, and this is what I applaud you, Nell, for your vision in getting Cadillac Moon Ensemble on board. And musicians are out there, and they want to be part of this.
Yeah.
They want to, you know, they just need someone to come along and say, hey, you can connect these things together. And I've taken singers on backpacking trips, and you know, musicians out in the wild. And you know, this is my own experience for a long time. I didn't know. I studied music in cities, and then I went and spent summers, you know, hiking or backpacking or camping. Where was the connection? I didn't know. And then when I put them together, you know, everything took off. And there's so many musicians out there that are just waiting to kind of have that, aha, this is open for me. And so I hope that more musicians, you know, the parks welcome them, and this becomes something that it shouldn't just be for the centennial. It should be every year. Right. And it should be there were words at the Michael Gordon premiere in Crater Lake of a new Americana. Now, I don't want to say, you know, I don't care about that isms or anything, but I think that would be really great if it became an annual thing, that every park had music festivals and had an engagement, because it's a very unique way to engage and celebrate nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have just a sort of fun question, which is that what national park, monument, seashore, or recreation area that you've never been to is like the top of your wish list? And I have personally a very long list, but I haven't spent much time in the Pacific Northwest, and I would love to, and particularly Olympic National Park. Looks incredible. So what's at the top of your wish list for national parks?
Who wants to go first? I'm going to need a minute to think about this one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've been to Denali National Park in Alaska, but Gates of the Arctic and Glacier Bay, those are on the top of my list. That is on the top of my list.
I'd like to go to Arcadia National Park in Maine. Yeah, that's the first one that comes to mind.
I'm so lucky that I've been to so many places.
Which ones haven't you been to?
And some of the places I most want to go are actually places I've already been. I just want to go back and delve deeper. But I think that probably if I had to pick, I have not been to Hawaii volcanoes, and that would be an utterly different kind of a landscape than I've ever seen. So that would be high on my list. Maybe Channel Islands also is a place that I would be very interested in seeing. I think those would be the ones that spring to mind first. It's very exciting to be part of a group that you've helped form.
Yeah.
It gives an identity and a shape to what many of us have been doing individually for quite some time. And it also, I think you've done a beautiful job of highlighting that there's no one right way of doing this, that being inspired by landscape, being inspired by a sense of place, and then turning that into a musical expression somehow is a really kaleidoscopic concept, and something that each of us just sitting here today do very differently. And the other composers who are represented on your website, many of whom we collectively know, Alex and Christina and many others, been new ones added recently. I know all of us are approaching our work in a very unique and individual way, but that all of those unique positions have a facet on your network, and I think that's great. It's fun for us to, composers work in isolation so much of the time, it's fun for us to feel like we're part of something larger.
Absolutely. I would say I would like to speak to just the composers that are going to be coming and viewing and wanting to join as the ranks grow. And I spent a lot of time, and I still do, with kind of these aesthetic and abstract questions of how do we transform nature into art, or into this experience. And I would just like to say, don't worry about any of those issues, the things that go on in your head, like Stephen was talking about, or the things that go on at your schools or programs. I think what's most important is that you spend time in the landscape and you spend time in nature. And if you do that, if you devote yourself, just like you're devoting yourself to your craft as a composer, all those things will work themselves out, and it won't really matter. And it's what we're doing is really a value shift. So as a composer, maybe you're not spending your summers at a festival or something else, or doing something else. You're spending 6 weeks in the wilderness, like Steve here does, and that's saying something about yourself as an artist and about our society, that we're not turning toward inward like so much of our contemporary music and culture is always, in the screen, and everything is just going inward. You're going outward. And that's really important, and I think that we all benefit. We're all here because of that, and we're benefiting from it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really important for us all to remember what this is all about,
mm-hmm.
like what our core inspiration is, and not to forget that. Like, this is landscape composers, and landscape is what this is about, and everything that is entailed with that, and how we need to continue to have those places and to support them. And we're advocates for that. As artists and composers, we have that special gift of where we can communicate to the public, and we're choosing to do that for our earth. And so I think it's important for us to keep remembering that, and our audiences to remember that this isn't necessarily about our music. This isn't an ego-driven thing. This is something we're all doing because we love our earth and we want preservation to happen. And we're doing this through giving ourselves to the public and giving our music to the public, inspired by all these places we have preserved.
Well, I think that's an excellent note to end on. Thank you all so much for chatting with me today, and I hope that visitors to our website enjoy this interview, and I'm really looking forward to the concert tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys
Thank
so
you.
much.